Okay, the expensive ones are a bit easier to clean. Oh, but the camera doesn't really show. There's a bit of a smudge there. I've just like scrubbed at it like crazy and it's still there. Windex. This is a $6 whiteboard from Kmart that could change your life. It comes complete with a pen that's quite hard to clean off and a whole bunch of useless magnets that if you have a 2-year-old, they will enjoy attempting to choke on. Please don't let your child play with the magnets. What do you do with a whiteboard to make life easier, I hear you say? Well, at the end of your study session or the end of the day, write down all the stuff you're only halfway through. I know there are calendar reminders and tasks and all that stuff, but I find it really handy to be able to just pick this up in the morning and in that hole in my brain where other people might have a memory of what they got up to yesterday afternoon, I can fill that gap by just looking at the 4 or 5 things that are written on here. Now, sometimes something has happened overnight. You might have had another class, you might have a bunch of fires that you need to put out, and you don't get to what's on the whiteboard straight away, but the whiteboard keeps remembering it for you, which is the really nifty thing that I don't know about your brain, but my brain can't really do that. So on the whiteboard, you will leave your tasks until you finish them, and once they've been there about a week, that's then the time to use tip number 2, your calendar. So if you haven't got to it in a week, it's probably not like put out a fire kind of urgent. And those are the kinds of things that work well as like an event in your calendar. I like events better than tasks because they're visible when I open my calendar. Let me show you. Ah, that was the wrong screen. What is that screen? Yep, that's a class I'm doing. Let's try. Why would that have been not visible? I don't understand. Oh, I know why, because I've got to refresh it. Here we go. Display capture, display capture. Yeah, there it is. Nice. Okay, now you can't see it because I haven't lined it up. There. Now, I would chuck in, like if I hadn't got up to something, I would actually literally just make an event that tells me to do it. And I frequently do this with my day. I block out huge chunks of time to work on the things that I want to work on. As you can see, lots you can do. This is Google Calendar, by the way, which is free. The other thing I love, and you probably... This is Google Calendar, by the way, which is free, and I like it in dark mode because it makes me feel a little bit sci-fi. So if I've got a thing on my whiteboard that I haven't got to for a little while, I just chuck it in here, on a day, sometimes where I've already got other stuff going on. But the fact that it will then pop up on my phone as a reminder is super useful for just keeping stuff present in your very overtaxed working memory. So that's one thing it's good for. This is the next thing, and it's actually quite exciting. So your university uses an LMS. That is a learning management system. It's incredibly boring. It might have a funky name like Moodle or Blackboard or Canvas, but it's a very dull platform. Here is my one. Oh, look, a reminder on my phone from my calendar. Ta-da! Okay, so, when you open it up, you see your dashboard, which looks like this. Come on, internet, you can do it. There we go. There's all your units of study. But over here on the left, we have this miraculous calendar tab. What is this for, I hear you ask? Well, this tells you all the stuff. Oh my gosh, the internet's so slow. There we go. This tells you all the stuff that you have coming up. And what I like most about it is that there is this button here called Calendar Feed, where you can copy this URL and then import this into any other calendar, like your Outlook, your iCal, or Google Calendar, if that's what you use. And then once you've done that, this is what it looks like. Down here, it pops up as its very own calendar that's been imported. So you can toggle it on and off if it annoys you. And what it will show you is your assessment items that you have coming up, and see that they're put in as these all-day things. So as you're scrolling down, they don't disappear off the top of your screen. This is how students remember the due dates on their assignments. As far as I'm aware, no one has them like programmed into their brains. They need to use some kind of calendar. And this also saves you having to manually put them all in. If you've got 4 units, 3 assessments per unit per semester, that's a lot of entering stuff into the calendar. Once this has all happened automatically from this one button that you clicked, you can then go into the events and change the settings so that you get more reminders about them. So you can duplicate it, you can copy it to your own calendar so that you can then change any of its characteristics, and you can set up what's really handy is setting up reminders a week or 2 weeks out from the actual deadline so that you really do find yourself thinking about these things before it's the day before. Now, we'll go into how dopamine and neurodivergent brains go together and the weird and wacky, wonderful little journeys that takes us on, but not in this video. But I will say this, our brains work better when there is a looming deadline. For me, in the beginnings, when I was an undergrad, that meant starting by putting in my calendar deadlines a day ahead of when they were actually due. So that would mean that I would start working on it much later than I should, but with enough time to actually get it done. One of the things that I think happens most with my neurodivergent students is that they think that they can get an assignment done in 3 or 4 hours, and then they open it and realize that it's like a 50-hour project that requires them to have done 2 weeks of data gathering and actually show all of the evidence of that. Then they freak out because it's due tomorrow and they know they can't ask for a 2-week extension. So if you're in that boat, you need to have the deadline for the assignment in your calendar quite a bit earlier than it is. The day before usually worked for me when I was at uni, but uni's a bit more complicated these days. So if I were you, I would be putting it in a few days early. Then set your calendar to remind you a week ahead of the deadline. Then you're starting with more time than you realise. And by halfway through the semester, you won't remember whether you put it in a day early, 2 days early, or 3 days early. And that way you will actually trick yourself into getting started on that thing before you otherwise would. This has become very long-winded. This is what happens when you don't work off a script. What did I want to say about this? You can toggle it on and off. Super handy for not freaking out, but also being able to see your assignments as they're coming up. And then if you import them directly and make yourself the owner of the tasks, you can change the characteristics of the task. And one of my fave things to do is in my personal calendar, you can't change this in Canvas, is to set a deadline actually ahead of where it is. So if I've got something due on Wednesday the 1st, then I say to myself that it's due on the 29th. Or, several days ahead of that actual deadline. That's usually enough time for me to go, oh my God, I've got this thing that I haven't started that's due, open it up, realize that it's much more work than I thought it was, and I've still got more than 24 hours of life before the deadline actually occurs. So don't just set it one day in advance. If you really want this system to work, make it like 3 days in advance of the deadline. Because let's face it, what would be the problem with getting something done ahead of the deadline? Crazy, I know.